What do you think you owe your success to?
There's nothing to do with us at all. It's just our success is due to the taste of the public.
Well, you've just lost me for words.
In July 1979, a no-nonsense collective with roots in Australia and Scotland set the music world alight with their phenomenal sixth album. Highway to Hell marked the point at which ACDC began their upward spiral to colossal worldwide success, helping to transform them from a well-respected hard rock group to international institution.
You put that on and you listen to it, it cannot fail to move you.
There were an awful lot of people out there who'd never heard ACDC before Highway to Hell came out, and their first introduction was that song, Highway to Hell. And I think it probably came across as refreshing, honest, and in a way, I think, soulful.
It was the moment where, you know, the door marked superstars opened to them and someone beckoned them through.
This film takes an in-depth look at that album and the madness that surrounded it. The extreme highs, the devastating lows, and the frenzied guitar soundscape that still packs a punch to this day. By the time the 70s were drawing to a close, Bon Scott, Cliff Williams, Phil Rudd, and Angus and Malcolm Young had already established themselves as one of the most hard-rocking and distinctive groups in the industry. As well as gathering a rabid fan base in their native Australia, ACDC had also developed a large following in the UK, an appreciation that seemed to come from all sides of the musical spectrum.
They'd made their big break out of Australia, but hadn't cracked America. By that point, they would still undertake the kind of lengthy tours, support tours at the time, that you just don't see anymore. You know, I mean, they'd be out with you know, sort of major bands, Aerosmith and Scorpions and things like that of the time. And also they'd made the UK very much their own by decamping to London from Australia.
And look, your mob are over here. ACDC, the lads themselves, chatting away in the corner here at Covent Garden. I'm going to get Angus and Bon to tell me about your tour over here. What have you blokes been doing? Can I get you to come down and have a look at our most attractive part of town?
I thought this was it.
The English rock fans kind of got ACDC. They got the fact that they were just these wonderful riff masters, these riff meisters rather. They got what they were about. I think the Americans, on the other hand, kind of thought that ACDC were a bit of a kind of cartoon.
When they came here, I guess they did immediately create an impression, and it's really hard to imagine them not creating an impression anywhere they played live. AC/DC did have that crossover appeal, certainly. They transcended fashion, and I think it was because of that feeling of how real they were. I think that's what did it. So punks could easily embrace them. How could punk think, you know, that they were pretentious old farts? Of course they weren't. They had, in many ways, a punk spirit.
The first time I came across AC/DC was a friend of mine playing me, I think it must have been High Voltage, and saying, oh, there's this great new punk band from Australia. So, and I was listening to it thinking, punk? I'm not quite sure this fits into the punk context, you know. But I was really impressed. So that was really my only experience. I think the label of punk band was more just the way that the media reacts to these things. You know, punk was the thing at the time, so so somebody had thought, well, let's label them a punk band for the time being.
Punks liked AC/DC. Traditional heavy metal guys who like Black Sabbath and Priest were into AC/DC. And then you had people who didn't really like rock at all, that because AC/DC had these sort of very tuneful songs that were very catchy and you could kind of punch your fist in the air, you know, along to. I think they transcended all genres, really. People loved them from, you know, all over the world.
You would get punks going to see AC/DC. You get metalheads going to see AC/DC, and everyone mixed with no problem at all. Put them in their own niches, put them in a punk gig or a metal gig, and probably there would be a bit of a problem. However, AC/DC crossed that barrier because I think their music crossed that barrier. They had the energy, they had the attitude, they had the youth, they had the zest to appeal to this punk market, yet they had the musicianship and the songs and the heritage to appeal to the metalheads who've grown up with Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, who are looking for something new. And I think that's another key. They came on a scene at a time when people were looking for something new.
Like we honestly thought that the punk and the new wave thing might sort of spoil a bit for us, but it hasn't at all, you know?
Yeah.
It was a big fad, like it's just like anything else, big fad for a while, and there's those that are still hanging on to it. But the main thing about it is that it gives rock music a real kick in the guts, you know?
Yeah.
You're known these days as a heavy metal group, which I find absurd, you know? How do you find it when they classify you as a certain type of group?
Well, it's a bit silly, really. I mean, because we've never come out and said we're a heavy metal group.
Right.
For us, it's just the same as what it always was since 1955. Or it's rock and roll music, no more, no less. You know, maybe it's a bit louder, but apart from that, it's no different.
Although wider success was just around the corner, it had been a relatively long haul for AC/DC, a band with an ambition and drive beyond the capacity of many of their contemporaries.
Looking back, I'm just amazed that it took them so long to succeed. That's the only thing that puzzles me about their career arc, you know. But back then, bands did work at it, you know. You look at how many albums Queen recorded in the 70s, look at how many albums Elton John recorded in the 70s, you know. It was just, man, they were working hard.
You're not a band until you've done 500 gigs, you know, and that's what Australian bands learnt in those days. AC/DC were sort of, you know, just ahead of the curve in that.
Some of the stories that impressed me the most were the stories about them playing 3 and 4 gigs a day. You know, they'd play a couple of afternoon gigs and then a couple of evening gigs and finish up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And they're constant touring around. I mean, they worked really, really hard. And you know, and in that respect deserved every bit of success that they've had.
When you spend years touring at grassroots level and playing in front of crowds that are pretty unforgiving, you learn to develop an act, a good, strong, solid rock act pretty quickly, or you don't last. And in the case of AC/DC, the fact that they toured for years around these working men's clubs in Australia, which is a pretty tough environment to grow up in, meant that in later years they had a sound which was really precise and really tough. But it had subtlety as well. It wasn't just about big brash riffing. It had the ability to please pretty much everyone, because I think they'd had a kind of trial by fire in their earlier years.
This incarnation of AC/DC was also blessed with the good fortune of being fronted by one of the most charismatic performers rock music has ever seen. Bon Scott was the figurehead of the band, a hell-raising Tasmanian devil who grabbed attention wherever he went, and in no small part fueled the reputation of the group.
Anyone who thinks that Bon was someone who didn't care about fame or making it is gravely mistaken. Bon wanted to make it, he wanted to be a rock and roll star, and he wanted to be in the biggest band in the world. It's simple as that. We both did. He actually did, posthumously, I didn't. But he took off on his dream closer than ever before of becoming what he'd always wanted to be, which was, you know, a global rock and roll star. Although star, I'm not sure about the word star, but certainly a major rock and roll force. I think he was a reluctant star. And I saw, of course, AC/DC's progress. I was in the music business, and I followed his career.